Margaret Thornfield possessed the kind of determination that could move mountains, or, in her particular case, transform an entire neighborhood into a breathtaking botanical wonderland that would become the epicenter of one of the most extraordinary acts of civil disobedience ever witnessed in the quiet suburban enclave of Willowbrook Heights. At 63 years of age, with silver-streaked auburn hair perpetually adorned with bits of soil and petals, calloused hands that bore testament to decades of devoted gardening, and emerald eyes that sparkled with an almost mischievous intensity whenever she discussed her beloved flowers, Margaret had cultivated something far more precious than mere plants in her expansive front yard. She had nurtured a living masterpiece that defied every conventional notion of suburban landscaping and challenged the very foundations of municipal authority. The morning that would forever alter the trajectory of Margaret's life dawned with deceptive tranquility, painted in soft pastels of rose and gold that seemed to mirror the delicate hues of her prized heritage roses. She emerged from her Victorian cottage, a charming structure whose gingerbread trim and wraparound porch perfectly complemented the riot of colors that cascaded across her property like a painter's palette come to life. The air hung heavy with the intoxicating fragrance of jasmine, honeysuckle, and lavender, creating an olfactory symphony that drew neighbors, strangers, and even delivery drivers into lingering moments of pure sensory bliss. Margaret's garden was not merely a collection of plants, but rather a carefully orchestrated ecosystem where every bloom, leaf, and vine had been positioned with the precision of a master architect and the passion of a devoted artist. For 15 years, Margaret had poured her heart, soul, and considerable financial resources into creating what she considered her magnum opus. The transformation had been gradual but relentless, beginning with a simple border of marigolds and expanding over time into an elaborate tapestry that encompassed nearly every inch of her considerable lot. Towering sunflowers created natural boundaries, their golden faces following the sun's path throughout the day like faithful sentinels guarding the botanical kingdom below. Cascades of morning glories climbed trellises and fence posts, their trumpet-shaped blooms opening each dawn in a daily miracle of purple, pink, and white. Rose bushes of every conceivable variety, from delicate tea roses to robust climbers, formed the backbone of her design, their thorny stems supporting blooms that range from pristine white to deep burgundy, each variety carefully selected for its unique contribution to the overall composition. The garden's complexity revealed itself in layers, much like a beloved novel that disclosed new depths with each reading. Ground-covering plants created intricate patterns that shifted throughout the growing season, with spring bulbs giving way to summer annuals and autumn chrysanthemums in a carefully choreographed succession of color and texture. Margaret had studied horticulture with the dedication of a scholar, learning the specific needs of each plant, understanding the subtle relationships between different species, and mastering the art of companion planting that allowed her garden to thrive with minimal chemical intervention. She knew which flowers attracted beneficial insects, which combinations created the most stunning visual impact, and how to extend the blooming season from early spring until the first hard frost of winter. But Margaret's neighbors in Willowbrook Heights were not universally appreciative of her botanical artistry. The subdivision, established in the 1980s during the height of suburban conformity, had been designed around principles of uniformity and predictability. Homeowner association guidelines specified exact parameters for lawn care, mandating specific grass varieties, prescribed fertilization schedules, and rigid standards for what constituted acceptable landscaping. The covenant documents, thick legal tomes that governed every aspect of property appearance, clearly stated that front yards should consist primarily of turf grass, with modest ornamental plantings restricted to designated areas near the foundation of homes. Margaret's exuberant garden violated virtually every one of these carefully crafted restrictions, transforming her property into what critics described as either a wild jungle or a dangerous precedent, depending on their particular perspective. The Homeowner Association Board, led by the formidable Harrison Blackwell III, had been monitoring Margaret's garden with increasing concern for several years. Blackwell, a retired corporate executive whose own property featured the kind of meticulously manicured lawn that appeared in landscaping magazines, viewed Margaret's floral rebellion as a direct threat to property values and neighborhood stability. His house, a sprawling colonial revival with perfectly symmetrical foundation plantings and a lawn that resembled green velvet, stood in stark contrast to Margaret's organic wonderland. The difference between their properties was so pronounced that visitors often commented on the surreal transition from Blackwell's sterile perfection to Margaret's wild abundance, as if crossing an invisible boundary between two entirely different worlds. Blackwell had built his reputation on order, control, and unwavering adherence to established protocols. His professional life had been devoted to corporate efficiency, streamlined processes, and the elimination of variables that might disrupt carefully planned outcomes. Retirement had not diminished his need for control. Instead, it had redirected his focus toward ensuring that Willowbrook Heights maintained the standards of excellence that, in his opinion, justified the premium property values residents enjoyed. Margaret's garden represented everything he found troubling about modern society: a rejection of established norms, a celebration of chaos over order, and a flagrant disregard for the collective good in favor of individual expression. The conflict had been simmering beneath the surface for months, manifesting in increasingly tense encounters at neighborhood association meetings, pointed comments about certain properties that failed to meet community standards, and a growing chorus of complaints from residents who shared Blackwell's vision of suburban conformity. Margaret had received several informal warnings, delivered by well-meaning neighbors who urged her to tone down her garden before the association took official action. She had listened politely to their concerns, offering tours of her property and explaining the ecological benefits of native plantings, but had made no meaningful concessions to their demands for conformity. The morning that changed everything began like countless others, with Margaret emerging into her garden at dawn to check on her plants, deadhead spent blooms, and water any sections that appeared to need additional moisture. The ritual was meditative, connecting her to the rhythms of nature and providing a sense of peace that no indoor activity could match. She moved through her garden with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in their environment, automatically noting which plants were thriving, which needed attention, and how the overall composition was evolving as the season progressed. Her movements were those of a conductor leading a symphony, subtle adjustments and gentle interventions that maintained the delicate balance she had spent years perfecting. The first sign of trouble appeared in the form of a white municipal truck that pulled up to the curb with deliberate precision. Two men in matching khaki uniforms emerged, their clipboard-wielding efficiency suggesting official business of an unpleasant nature. Margaret watched from behind a particularly spectacular climbing rose as they surveyed her property with a dispassionate assessment of tax assessors or health inspectors. Their conversation, carried on the morning breeze, consisted of technical terms and reference numbers that meant nothing to her, but clearly held significant meaning for them. They photographed various sections of her garden from multiple angles, their documentation process suggesting preparation for some form of legal proceeding. The formal citation, when it arrived 3 days later via certified mail, represented a bureaucratic masterpiece of legal language and municipal authority. The document, printed on official city letterhead and bearing multiple official seals, informed Margaret that her property had been found in violation of Municipal Code Section 847.3.2, which governed landscaping standards for residential properties within city limits. The violation notice detailed specific infractions, including excessive vegetation density, inappropriate plant materials for residential zoning, failure to maintain required turf grass coverage, and creation of visual obstruction contrary to neighborhood character standards. The financial penalty attached to these violations was both shocking and insulting: $500, payable within 30 days, along with a requirement that she bring her property into compliance by removing all non-conforming plant materials and restoring the front yard to acceptable standards. The notice included helpful suggestions for achieving compliance, recommending specific varieties of grass seed and providing contact information for city-approved landscaping contractors who could assist with the restoration process. Failure to comply within the specified time frame would result in additional penalties, potential legal action, and the possibility of city crews performing the work at her expense. Margaret's initial reaction was pure disbelief, followed quickly by indignation that burned with the intensity of her beloved chili peppers ripening in the late summer sun. The document felt surreal in her hands, as if someone had delivered a citation for breathing too deeply or smiling too broadly. How could plants, living things of beauty that harmed no one and brought joy to countless passers-by, be considered violations worthy of fines and legal threats? The absurdity of the situation was almost comical, except for the very real financial penalty and the devastating prospect of being forced to destroy 15 years of careful cultivation. The evening following the citation's arrival, Margaret sat on her front porch swing, surrounded by the evening chorus of crickets and the gentle fragrance of night-blooming jasmine, contemplating her options with the methodical approach she applied to garden planning. The swing, a weathered wooden structure that had belonged to her grandmother, creaked softly as she rocked back and forth, its rhythmic motion helping to organize her thoughts. She could pay the fine and comply with the city's demands, sacrificing her beloved garden to maintain peace with authorities and neighbors. She could contest the citation through official channels, engaging in a legal battle that might prove both expensive and futile. Or she could choose a third option, one that was beginning to crystallize in her mind with increasing clarity and appeal. The idea that eventually became her magnificent act of defiance germinated like a seed in fertile soil, growing stronger and more detailed with each passing hour. If the city considered her existing garden worthy of a $500 fine, what would they make of something truly spectacular? If they viewed her current collection of flowers as excessive, how would they respond to a display that transformed excess into art, rebellion into beauty, and individual expression into community inspiration? The concept was both simple and audacious. Instead of removing flowers, she would add more, not just a few additional plants, but enough to create something unprecedented in suburban landscaping history. Margaret's decision to plant 1,000 additional flowers was not made impulsively or in anger, but rather emerged from a deep wellspring of conviction about the fundamental rights of property owners, the value of natural beauty, and the importance of resistance to arbitrary authority. The number itself held symbolic significance. 10 for each of the 15 years she had spent creating her original garden, multiplied by the financial penalty imposed by the city, divided by the 5 members of the city council who had presumably approved the ordinance that made her flowers illegal. The mathematical precision of her rebellion appealed to her systematic nature, while the sheer audacity of the plan satisfied her growing need to make a statement that could not be ignored or dismissed. The logistical challenges of acquiring and planting 1,000 additional flowers were formidable, requiring careful planning, significant financial investment, and physical stamina that would test even someone half her age. Margaret approached these challenges with the same methodical thoroughness she had applied to creating her original garden, developing detailed lists of plant varieties, calculating spacing requirements, and mapping out planting locations with the precision of a military campaign. She spent hours researching suppliers, comparing prices, and identifying the most efficient methods for managing such a massive undertaking within the time frame she had established for herself. The financial cost of her planned rebellion would far exceed the original $500 fine, but Margaret viewed this as an investment in principles rather than mere landscaping. Her retirement savings, carefully accumulated over decades of teaching high school biology, would provide the resources necessary to make her statement. The irony was not lost on her that she would spend her own money to create something beautiful in response to being penalized for beauty she had already created. The twisted logic of the situation only strengthened her resolve and added an element of poetic justice to her plans. Margaret's first stop in implementing her grand design was Henderson's Garden Center, a family-owned nursery located on the outskirts of town, where she had been a regular customer for years. The sight of her approaching with a list that ran to 3 pages and a determined expression that brooked no compromise prompted immediate attention from Tom Henderson himself, the third-generation owner whose grandfather had established the business in the 1940s. Tom, a weathered man whose own passion for plants was evident in every corner of his sprawling establishment, listened with growing amazement as Margaret outlined her requirements. The order Margaret placed that morning exceeded anything in the garden center's history, encompassing flowers in every conceivable variety, color, and growth habit. She requested marigolds by the hundreds, their golden and orange blooms chosen for their reliability, drought tolerance, and extended blooming season. Petunias in rainbow assortments would provide cascading color from hanging baskets and raised beds. Zinnias, cosmos, and celosia would add height and texture variations. Native wildflowers would attract beneficial insects while requiring minimal maintenance. Bulbs for spring blooming would ensure that her statement extended across multiple seasons. The sheer diversity of her selections reflected not only her extensive botanical knowledge, but also her determination to create something unprecedented in both scale and beauty. Tom Henderson's initial response was practical concern about his ability to fulfill such a massive order within Margaret's desired timeframe. His greenhouse space was extensive but not unlimited, and sourcing that quantity of healthy, blooming plants would require coordination with multiple suppliers across the region. However, as Margaret explained the motivation behind her purchase, Tom's concern transformed into admiration and then into wholehearted support. He had always been an advocate for gardening as both art and environmental stewardship, and Margaret's defiant response to municipal overreach resonated with his own experiences dealing with bureaucratic restrictions on his business operations. Within hours of Margaret's departure, Tom was working his network of contacts throughout the horticultural industry, calling in favors, negotiating rush orders, and coordinating deliveries that would transform his garden center into the staging area for what he had begun describing to friends as the most beautiful act of civil disobedience in American history. His enthusiasm for the project was infectious, spreading to his employees and customers who began volunteering assistance and expertise. The garden center took on the atmosphere of a campaign headquarters, with delivery schedules posted on bulletin boards and progress updates shared with growing excitement. Word of Margaret's planned rebellion spread through the local gardening community with the speed of morning glory vines climbing a trellis in summer sunshine. The Regional Garden Club, which had honored Margaret's original garden with multiple awards over the years, offered both moral support and practical assistance. Club members with pickup trucks volunteered to help with transportation. Master gardeners offered advice on optimal planting techniques for such a large-scale installation. Garden designers contributed suggestions for maximizing visual impact while ensuring plant health and sustainability. The underground network of support that emerged around Margaret's project revealed the depth of frustration that many residents felt about increasing municipal restrictions on personal property use. Homeowners who had been forced to remove fruit trees, prohibited from installing rain barrels, or cited for allowing their grass to grow beyond prescribed heights found in Margaret's rebellion an outlet for their own suppressed desires to push back against bureaucratic overreach. Her flowers became symbols of resistance, not just to landscaping restrictions, but to the broader trend toward governmental control over individual expression. As the first deliveries of plants began arriving at Margaret's property, the transformation commenced with breathtaking speed. Working from dawn until dusk, with breaks only for meals and brief rests, she began the monumental task of preparing soil, arranging plants according to her master plan, and installing the infrastructure necessary to support such an extensive garden. Her existing irrigation system required expansion to accommodate the additional plantings. Pathways needed to be carved through the emerging jungle to allow access for maintenance. Support structures for climbing varieties had to be installed with both immediate stability and long-term growth in mind. The physical demands of the project pushed Margaret to her limits and beyond, but she attacked each challenge with the determination of someone fighting for principles larger than personal convenience. Blisters formed on her hands despite well-worn gardening gloves. Her back ached from countless hours of bending, digging, and planting. The summer heat seemed more oppressive than usual, and the physical exhaustion was unlike anything she had experienced since her 20s. Yet each morning she emerged ready to continue, energized by the growing beauty around her and the knowledge that she was creating something unprecedented. Neighbors' reactions to the evolving spectacle ranged from awe to horror, often shifting from one extreme to the other as the implications of Margaret's actions became clear. Children were universally enchanted, begging parents to slow down or stop entirely as they passed the property, their wide-eyed wonder at the explosion of colors and scents serving as a reminder of humanity's instinctive connection to natural beauty. Many adults found themselves similarly mesmerized, discovering that their routine commutes had become scenic tours as they unconsciously adjusted their routes to pass Margaret's property and witness the daily progress of her magnificent rebellion. However, not all responses were positive. Harrison Blackwell III was apoplectic with rage, viewing Margaret's escalation as a direct challenge to his authority and a dangerous precedent that could undermine the entire homeowner association structure. His complaints to city officials became increasingly strident, demanding immediate enforcement action and threatening legal consequences if the situation was not resolved quickly. His morning walks past Margaret's property became exercises in barely controlled fury, his face reddening as he cataloged each new addition to what he described as the neighborhood's growing embarrassment. The city's response to Margaret's expanding garden revealed the limitations of municipal authority when confronted with creative resistance. The original citation had assumed compliance or, at worst, a standard legal challenge through established procedures. The possibility that a violator would respond by dramatically increasing the scale of their violation had not been anticipated by the bureaucratic mind that created the landscaping ordinance. City officials found themselves in the unprecedented position of dealing with someone who was not trying to avoid penalties, but seemed determined to earn them in the most spectacular way possible. Emergency meetings were called among city council members, code enforcement officers, and the municipal attorney to develop strategies for addressing Margaret's defiant escalation. The legal complexities were substantial. While her original garden had violated specific provisions of the municipal code, many of her new plantings fell into gray areas that had not been explicitly addressed in the ordinance. The sheer scale of her project also created practical enforcement challenges. Standard remedies assumed small-scale violations that could be corrected quickly and inexpensively. Margaret's thousand-flower rebellion required responses that the bureaucratic system was not designed to handle. As the third week of intensive planting progressed, Margaret's property had been transformed into something that defied easy categorization. It was simultaneously a garden, an art installation, a political statement, and a testament to human determination. The visual impact was overwhelming in the most positive sense, creating layers of color, texture, and fragrance that seemed to pulse with life and energy. Visitors standing at the property's edge found their eyes unable to process the full spectacle at once, instead focusing on individual elements, a particularly striking combination of complementary colors, an architectural vine structure, a cluster of flowers that seemed to glow with inner light, before pulling back to appreciate the magnificent whole. The ecological impact of Margaret's expanded garden was as impressive as its visual beauty. The increased plant diversity attracted an unprecedented variety of beneficial insects, creating a buzzing symphony of bees, butterflies, and other pollinators that contributed to the health of gardens throughout the neighborhood. Birds discovered new nesting opportunities and food sources, their songs adding an auditory dimension to the sensory experience. The enhanced root systems improved soil stability and water retention, while the increased plant coverage helped moderate local temperatures through natural cooling effects. Local media outlets began taking notice of Margaret's horticultural rebellion as reports filtered in from residents, city officials, and garden enthusiasts who had heard about the extraordinary development in Willowbrook Heights. The first newspaper article, published in the lifestyle section of the regional paper, presented Margaret's story as a human interest piece about gardening passion taken to extremes. The accompanying photograph, showing Margaret standing amid towering sunflowers with soil-stained hands and a determined smile, captured the essence of someone who had found her calling and refused to be deterred by conventional limitations. The article's publication triggered an avalanche of public attention that none of the participants had anticipated. Letters to the editor poured in from readers who saw Margaret's story as inspiring evidence that individual citizens could still make meaningful statements against bureaucratic overreach. Garden enthusiasts made pilgrimages to Willowbrook Heights to witness the spectacle firsthand. Local television stations dispatched crews to document the phenomenon, their reports spreading Margaret's story to regional and eventually national audiences who were hungry for positive news about community spirit and individual determination. The growing media attention created additional pressure on city officials to resolve the situation quickly and decisively. What had begun as a routine code enforcement matter had evolved into a public relations challenge with implications far beyond municipal boundaries. Supporters of Margaret's cause began appearing at city council meetings, their passionate defenses of property rights and natural beauty, creating an atmosphere of civic engagement that had been absent from local politics for years. The meetings themselves became events, drawing crowds that exceeded the capacity of the council chambers and forcing officials to consider relocating proceedings to larger venues. Margaret found herself thrust into the unfamiliar role of public spokesperson for causes she had never explicitly intended to champion. Interview requests from newspapers, magazines, and television programs required her to articulate the principles and motivations behind her floral rebellion. The process of explaining her actions to journalists helped clarify her own thinking about property rights, environmental stewardship, and the role of beauty in community life. She discovered that her story resonated with people facing similar struggles in communities across the country, where increasing regulation was restricting individual expression and environmental responsibility. The financial implications of Margaret's rebellion extended far beyond her personal investment in plants and infrastructure. Property values in Willowbrook Heights began experiencing unexpected fluctuations as potential buyers responded differently to the neighborhood's newfound fame. Some prospective residents were attracted by the area's reputation for tolerating individual expression and natural beauty. Others were deterred by concerns about property restrictions and the potential for ongoing conflicts between residents and authorities. Real estate agents found themselves developing expertise in municipal landscaping ordinances as buyers demanded detailed information about what they could and could not do with their properties. The fourth week of Margaret's planting marathon coincided with the peak of summer blooming season, creating a convergence of natural cycles and human determination that produced truly spectacular results. Her 1,000 new flowers were established enough to begin reaching their full potential, while her original plantings responded to the improved growing conditions with renewed vigor. The synergistic effect created something greater than the sum of its parts, a living symphony of color, fragrance, and texture that seemed to pulse with its own energy and life force. Professional landscape designers and horticulturalists began making pilgrimages to study Margaret's techniques and document her methods. The density of plantings that she had achieved without creating overcrowded conditions challenged conventional wisdom about spacing and plant relationships. Her intuitive understanding of companion planting principles had created microclimates that allowed species with different environmental needs to thrive in close proximity. The water-wise techniques she had developed through years of experimentation provided valuable lessons for professionals facing increasing restrictions on irrigation usage. The academic interest in Margaret's garden led to informal collaborations with university, extension programs, and botanical research institutions. Graduate students in horticulture, environmental science, and landscape architecture requested permission to conduct studies on various aspects of her planted ecosystem. The data they collected began contributing to scholarly understanding of urban biodiversity, sustainable landscaping practices, and the psychological effects of natural beauty on human communities. Margaret's rebellion was evolving into an educational resource with implications far beyond its original purpose. As the one-month deadline for compliance with the original citation approached, Margaret's defiant response had achieved completion of her initial goal while evolving into something far more significant than anyone had anticipated. The 1,000 flowers had been planted, established, and were thriving beyond her most optimistic projections. The visual impact was breathtaking from every angle, creating a three-dimensional tapestry that changed throughout the day as different plants responded to varying light conditions, and the movements of pollinators created constantly shifting patterns of activity and color. The approaching deadline created a sense of anticipation that affected the entire community. Supporters organized vigils and solidarity events, bringing flowers from their own gardens to create additional displays on public property adjacent to Margaret's lot. Children from the elementary school created artwork inspired by her garden, their colorful drawings and paintings displayed in shop windows throughout the downtown area. Local businesses began offering discounts to customers wearing flower-themed clothing or accessories, turning Margaret's rebellion into an economic phenomenon that benefited the broader community. City officials found themselves caught between legal obligations to enforce their ordinances and practical recognition that Margaret's garden had become a source of positive attention and community pride. The influx of visitors was benefiting local businesses, while the media coverage was showcasing the community in ways that traditional marketing efforts had never achieved. Tourism inquiries were increasing as garden enthusiasts added Willowbrook Heights to their travel itineraries. Hotel bookings were up, restaurant reservations were harder to obtain, and garden supply stores were experiencing unprecedented demand for the plant varieties featured in Margaret's displays. The legal complexities of the situation continued to evolve as both sides prepared for what seemed like inevitable court proceedings. Margaret's growing support network included several attorneys who offered their services pro bono, recognizing the broader constitutional issues at stake in her case. The city's legal team was developing strategies for enforcement that would minimize public relations damage while maintaining the authority of municipal ordinances. Legal scholars from nearby universities began monitoring the case as a potential precedent for property rights disputes in other jurisdictions. On the morning that marked exactly 30 days since the original citation had been issued, Margaret stood in her garden at dawn, surrounded by the living testament to her principles and determination. The 1,000 flowers she had planted in defiance of municipal authority were thriving, their colors more vibrant, and their fragrances more intoxicating than she had dared to hope. The original $500 fine seemed insignificant compared to the beauty she had created and the movement she had inspired. Her rebellion had grown beyond flowers into something that challenged fundamental assumptions about individual rights, community standards, and the role of beauty in human life. The transformation of her property was complete, but Margaret's story was just beginning to unfold in ways that would influence communities, laws, and individual lives for years to come. The 1,000 flowers she had planted in response to a bureaucratic fine had bloomed into something unprecedented in the annals of civil disobedience, a rebellion rooted in beauty, sustained by principle, and destined to inspire others facing similar choices between compliance and conscience. Her garden had become a symbol of resistance that transcended its original context, demonstrating that sometimes the most powerful statements are made not with words or protests, but with acts of creation that affirm life, beauty, and human dignity in the face of arbitrary authority. The ripple effects of Margaret's floral rebellion continued expanding as summer progressed into autumn, creating consequences that reached far beyond the boundaries of Willowbrook Heights and touching lives in ways that none of the participants could have anticipated. Her story had tapped into something fundamental in the human spirit, a longing for beauty, a desire for individual expression, and a willingness to resist arbitrary authority when conscience demands action. The 1,000 flowers she had planted in defiance of a $500 fine had grown into a movement that challenged people everywhere to consider what they were willing to sacrifice for principles and what they were prepared to fight to preserve. The immediate practical challenges facing Margaret as autumn approached were substantial and complex. The approaching dormant season would test the long-term sustainability of her expanded garden while providing an opportunity to evaluate the success of her unprecedented planting project. Many of the flowers she had installed during the height of summer were annuals that would complete their life cycles with the first frost, requiring decisions about replacement strategies and long-term maintenance approaches. Perennial varieties needed preparation for winter survival, while bulb plantings for next spring's display required immediate attention despite the ongoing legal uncertainties surrounding her property's future. The city's response to Margaret's noncompliance with the original citation had evolved through several phases of bureaucratic confusion, legal consultation, and political maneuvering. The standard enforcement procedures designed for typical code violations proved inadequate when applied to someone who had responded to penalties by dramatically escalating their nonconforming behavior. Additional citations were issued, but the mathematical progression of fines quickly reached absurd levels that highlighted the arbitrary nature of the penalty structure. A garden that had originally merited a $500 fine was now theoretically subject to thousands of dollars in accumulated penalties, creating a legal situation that neither the municipal attorney nor the city council felt comfortable defending in court. The growing national attention focused on Margaret's case had attracted interest from constitutional law experts, property rights advocates, and environmental organizations who saw broader implications in her struggle with municipal authority. The American Civil Liberties Union sent representatives to assess the First Amendment dimensions of her case, arguing that garden design constituted a form of protected expression that could not be restricted without compelling governmental justification. Property rights organizations viewed her situation as a test case for challenging the expansion of municipal regulatory authority into areas traditionally governed by individual choice and personal responsibility. Margaret's daily routine had been permanently altered by her newfound status as an inadvertent symbol of resistance to bureaucratic overreach. The constant stream of visitors to her property required careful management to protect both the plants and her own privacy, while accommodating the genuine interest of supporters and curiosity seekers. She established informal visiting hours, posted guidelines for respectful garden touring, and created informational materials explaining her plant selections and growing techniques. The educational component of her rebellion had become as important as the visual spectacle, with visitors learning about sustainable gardening practices, native plant preservation, and the ecological benefits of diverse urban landscaping. The economic impact of Margaret's garden on the local community continued expanding as autumn tourist season brought unprecedented numbers of visitors to Willowbrook Heights. Local restaurants began offering garden tours lunch packages. Hotels developed special rates for horticultural tourists, and entrepreneurs launched guided walking tours that included Margaret's property as the centerpiece of a broader exploration of local gardening culture. The Chamber of Commerce, initially concerned about the negative publicity surrounding the municipal citation, began promoting the area as a destination for garden enthusiasts and supporters of individual property rights. Harrison Blackwell III's response to Margaret's successful mobilization of public opinion revealed the depths of his frustration with what he viewed as the breakdown of community standards and municipal authority. His complaints to city officials became increasingly strident and personal, demanding not only enforcement of existing ordinances, but also the creation of new regulations specifically designed to prevent future gardening extremism in residential neighborhoods. His own property, maintained to showcase conventional landscaping perfection, began attracting negative attention from Margaret's supporters, who contrasted its sterile uniformity with her vibrant celebration of natural beauty. The homeowner association's position became increasingly untenable as community opinion shifted decisively in Margaret's favor. Board meetings that had once focused on routine maintenance issues and minor compliance matters became contentious debates about the proper balance between community standards and individual expression. Several board members resigned rather than continue defending policies that were generating negative publicity and community division. Homeowner association membership began declining as residents questioned the value of paying fees to support an organization that seemed more focused on restriction than enhancement of community life. Margaret's personal transformation throughout the ordeal was as remarkable as the physical transformation of her property. The shy, retired biology teacher who had preferred the quiet company of her plants to the complexities of human social interaction had evolved into an articulate spokesperson for principles she had never expected to defend in public forums. Her media interviews revealed a thoughtful, determined woman whose passion for plants had led her to profound insights about freedom, beauty, and the responsibilities of citizenship in a democratic society. The legal proceedings that finally commenced in early autumn represented a convergence of constitutional law, municipal authority, property rights, and environmental policy that attracted attention from legal scholars across the country. Margaret's legal team, bolstered by pro bono support from several prominent civil rights organizations, argued that her garden represented protected expression under the First Amendment, while also asserting fundamental property rights that had been violated by overly broad municipal regulations. The city's attorneys focused on a legitimate governmental interest in maintaining community standards and preventing activities that might negatively impact neighboring properties or community safety. The courtroom proceedings became a forum for broader debates about the proper scope of government regulation in residential areas, the definition of protected expression, and the balance between individual rights and community interests. Expert witnesses included landscape architects, constitutional scholars, property appraisers, and environmental scientists who testified about various aspects of Margaret's garden and its impact on the surrounding community. The case attracted observers from municipalities across the country who were grappling with similar issues in their own jurisdictions. Public support for Margaret's position continued growing throughout the legal proceedings, fueled by media coverage that portrayed her as an ordinary citizen standing up to bureaucratic overreach in defense of beauty and individual expression. Rally organizations formed around the country, with gardening enthusiasts organizing flower power demonstrations in support of her cause. Social media campaigns spread her story internationally, attracting support from gardening communities in countries where similar conflicts between individual expression and governmental authority resonated with local experiences. The broader implications of Margaret's case extended far beyond landscaping regulations to fundamental questions about the role of beauty in human communities and the right of individuals to create environments that reflect their values and aesthetic preferences. Urban planning experts began re-examining assumptions about the desirability of uniform suburban landscapes, questioning whether diversity in residential landscaping might actually enhance rather than detract from community character and property values. Environmental scientists pointed to the ecological benefits of Margaret's approach, arguing that diverse, native plantings provided superior environmental services compared to conventional turf grass monocultures. The seasonal transition of Margaret's garden through autumn provided a living demonstration of her horticultural expertise and the long-term sustainability of her intensive planting approach. Rather than declining into dormancy, her expanded garden continued providing visual interest and ecological benefits as different plant varieties reached peak performance during cooler weather. Late-blooming perennials extended the display season, while seed heads and berries attracted migrating birds that added dynamic elements to the already complex ecosystem she had created. Margaret's daily maintenance routines during the autumn months revealed the magnitude of her commitment to the garden that had become both her personal sanctuary and public symbol. Hours of deadheading, dividing overgrown perennials, planting spring bulbs, and preparing tender varieties for winter required physical stamina and horticultural knowledge that impressed even professional landscapers. Her detailed documentation of plant performance, growth patterns, and seasonal characteristics contributed to the growing body of research being conducted on her property by university extension programs and botanical organizations. The community response to Margaret's garden during its first autumn evolved from curiosity and controversy to genuine appreciation for the unique contribution she had made to local character and identity. Property owners who had initially complained about her violation of community standards began recognizing the positive attention her garden brought to the neighborhood and the educational opportunities it provided for children and adults interested in learning about sustainable landscaping practices. The transformation of public opinion represented a victory for Margaret's vision that extended beyond legal vindication to social acceptance of her approach. Local schools began incorporating visits to Margaret's garden into their science curricula, with teachers using the diverse plant communities she had established to demonstrate concepts in biology, ecology, and environmental science. Students conducted research projects on pollinator relationships, plant adaptation strategies, and sustainable gardening techniques, turning Margaret's rebellion into an outdoor classroom that provided hands-on learning opportunities unavailable in traditional educational settings. The educational partnerships that developed around her garden created lasting relationships between Margaret and local institutions that ensured ongoing support for her work.